Hi, welcome back to another episode of Minds Behind Maps. I'm Maxim Leneman, and this is the latest episode in this experiment I'm trying, where I want to sit down with people who are creating and using anything geospatial to try to understand more about the field and the people in it. Before I get started, I want to take a little moment to mention that I'm going to try to increase the number of episodes I put out. I still don't really know what I'm doing with this podcast, if I'm being quite honest, but I've really been enjoying the process, all the while hearing some pretty good feedback. I've been roughly putting out an episode a month so far, and I'd like to try to double that. I don't know how things are going to go, and I might fall back a bit later if that doesn't work out, because I have a lot of other things going on, but I'll just give it a shot and see what happens from there. I see this as just an extension to the experimenting. I still want to keep doing things in this longer format that I've been doing, though. The last thing I want is just to dilute this down to be able to make more. I want to try to keep pushing myself a bit more and doing so by iterating more. Once again, I'd be really curious to know if you have anything to say about this, so feel free to reach out to me either on Twitter, that's either directly at Max Lenemans on my personal account, or I created a new account for the podcast, that's at Minds Behind Maps. That's just going to be for the podcast releases and news. You can also reach me directly by email at minds.behind.maps@gmail.com. Feedback on podcast is a bit harder than on other mediums, as there's no comment sections or threads, so really feel free to reach out. Actually, not just to me, but I really encourage you to reach out to people whose content you appreciate. I think creating this podcast, I've just realized how much work goes into putting stuff out there, and how hearing about people caring about it and how that makes a whole difference in the process. Okay, with that out of the way, let's now get to today's episode. This conversation is with Dr. Nadine Alameh, who is the current CEO of the Open Geospatial Consortium, which is at the center of a lot of the standards and community of people using and building things in this field. I was actually quite hesitant at first, a few months ago, to reach out to Nadine. I wasn't really sure if I would be able to navigate a conversation with her, and I was honestly a bit intimidated, but I'm really glad I did it. This is part of the learning process of this podcast. Nadine is one of those persons that I admire more and more as I get to know more about her journey and her work. We talked about her early days in Lebanon and how she moved to the US to study at MIT, then went on to explore many different professional and personal paths. We talk about how dance has been an important part of her life, which might not have much to do about geospatial, but this is what I want this podcast to also be about, getting to know that people are multitude and how different, unrelated parts of their lives come together to make the person they are. We also, of course, talk about geospatial and standards, how and why they come together, and how it's mostly a community work than just an organization creating those. I really enjoyed this conversation as it went also outside of the geo bubble that we usually talk about in many different ways. We talked, for example, about how video games and the entertainment industry are being more prominent users of geodata. I hope you enjoy this conversation. I keep learning so much out of these, so I really do hope you can get something out of it. Here is my conversation with Nadine Alameh. Hi, Nadine. First of all, welcome to Minds Behind Maps. As you probably know, I like to ask the same question to everybody. So I would like to ask you how you would describe yourself.
First of all, thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here. I don't know how to describe myself. I'll give it a shot. And hopefully whoever is listening can tell me how they describe me. I think the first thing usually people say about me is I'm energetic. I'm easygoing. Definitely ambitious in a good way, because sometimes people think ambitious in a bad way. And how can I say this? Good-hearted, sometimes to a fault, so very trusting. And I put my heart into whatever I'm passionate about. And if I'm not passionate about something, you will know it. I get bored very quickly, and then I cannot just stay. I'm like buzzing and I
Mm.
need to move on. Yeah.
No, that's how I that's why I love this question is because I never really know how it's going to go. What do you mean by ambitious in a good way? I'm quite curious. What do you mean by that?
Mm. Uh, Maybe this it's stuck in my head. So it's part of you never being satisfied, right? Always wanting more. And my mom, when I was, a teenager, used to tell me, "You keep looking up, you're gonna break your neck one day." Like, and I had one time a manager tell me, this is why I say in a good way, a manager actually in one of my reviews, he said, this is all the good things, and you need to work on something. You're just, you're too ambitious. Like, I thought that was a good thing. So I always want to do more. And I think I reflect that in my, I work very hard, right? So I don't expect it to just come to me, but also I expect it from the people around me. So I feel like I push the people around me to do more because I know we can do more. So that's sort of the ambition in terms of um, I don't know, having more impact,
Hmm.
connecting more things.
Right.
And recently, as I'm getting older, not that I'm old, whoever is listening, but as I'm getting older, I feel like seriously, sometimes I feel, oh my God, did I waste this hour on this? I could have done so much more. So I don't know if I'm answering the question, but that's what came to mind. And now I tell people, especially women, it's like it's okay to be ambitious. Go for it. Go for it. Go for it. So quick
How
answer.
if
Yeah.
you imagined like a younger version of yourself seeing where you are now, do you think that would meet that requirement of, well, not requirement, but that aspiration that you have of that ambition? Because you have quite a wild path, and I'd like to come back to it a little bit later. But I think as I'm having these conversations, I kind of realize that people don't really end up where they expected to. But it seems like that ambition has driven you quite a lot. How do you think that younger version of you would have looked on the path that you've had?
Um, that's a good question. I think uh, the way the ambition manifests itself is, maybe my mom is right. You're always not looking down. I'm not saying looking up, but you're not looking down. You're never, oh, I was given a task, or this is my job description, and you stick to it, right? So you're always looking out, not up, not necessarily up. But I think it manifests itself in my younger version. Not that I was aware about it, right? It's just like, I think I was just following whatever. Uh, it in risk taking, right? So when you see an opportunity, you jump. You don't. And now looking back, I was like, oh my God, I left my country and my family. How did I do that? I don't remember sitting down and making this big decision
Mm,
that changed my life, but also it wasn't like, I'm crazy, right?
right,
So I think this is where, uh, looking back, I think it's mostly the way the ambition is manifests itself is by, finding these opportunities and just taking those risks, knowing maybe that if you fall, um, you're still okay,
right.
right? Uh, yeah.
Yeah, one of the so offline, I was telling you how I listened to an earlier interview that you gave, and one of the things that I thought was really like powerful that you mentioned is so you come from Lebanon and you had to leave the country quite early, and so I'd like to touch upon that. But one of the things that you said is that compared to that time earlier in your life, a lot of the decisions that you had to make later on were a lot easier because it felt like um, not much bad could happen out of that. And you were taking a risk, but they were nothing compared to what you had taken before. And that was really interesting to hear that because just looking back at some of the decisions I've made, I'm like making a huge deal out of it. And hearing these stories is really nice to, oh, if I don't know what to eat tonight, it's not that big of a deal. Or even, changing jobs, it's like I'm still very fortunate enough to have those opportunities and things like that. So I if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to go back to how that situation happened, and then kind of how it was for you to kind of leave everything behind and go to the US.
So I think back to the decision. So what I say, and I also tell my team the same thing. If it's not life or death, we're gonna be okay, because this is like ground zero. And I think this is what war teaches you, right? I think this is when you go back to living in war for the first like 22 years of your life, and I mean like daily,
Yeah.
civil war. Um, it and I tell them I didn't realize that we were just surviving, right? I know we were like, studying and playing and all of this, but uh, you realize that this is when I say the level zero. I know there are these pyramids of like,
Mm-hmm.
there's the physical, emotional, blah, blah, blah. But, um, and I think this is what makes then, the decisions at the higher levels sort of easier, because you've experienced ground zero, right?
Yeah.
You've seen it at its worst, and you survived. And I keep telling them, in the pandemics, for example, right? My kids didn't go to school for like 18 months. They're, virtual learning, and the parents here in the Washington, D.C. area was like, oh my God, this is going to set my kids back. And, what are we going to do? And I kept saying, it's like, when I look at my generation, we still did okay. Can we just relax? It's not the end of the world, like literally, right? Um, and I think that's the decision to leave. I don't know if it's a decision. It's
Mm.
like, as I was growing up, we had so my mom was raising us by herself. So that is three kids transporting us from, one place to the next to avoid bombs, like literally. And I was essentially, raising my brother and my sister with her, and never ever thought that I would leave them, like never, right?
Right.
But then this is, I think, maybe, I don't know, it's luck or how life pans out. There were 4 scholarships from MIT that were sent essentially to the American University of Beirut, and they picked the top 4 students. And I was telling this the other day. Somebody asked me, nobody had asked me that question before. So they picked the top 4, and there were 4 scholarships, and they sort of assigned them randomly. And one of them was in finance, one of them was in computer science, and one of them was GIS, and one of them was multimedia, right? And so the question that that person was asking was like, do you sometimes think, what if I got the multimedia one, right?
Mm.
And I was like, oh my God, I actually know where these guys ended up. Uh, but anyway, so it's like, it's random, you get it, and you can't say no, because
Right.
and then this is when I say you jump, because this may never happen again. um,
Mm.
um, and you live with it, I think. It's just like, what do they say when the what is it, when the things get tough, the tough gets going, whatever saying that is. But that's so true. You rise up, and it's not just you, it's like you and your family. So my family was dependent on me, but you know uh, it worked out, and
Mm.
eventually I was able to bring my brother here, and then my sister did her master's here at University of Maryland to be next to me. So not easy, but I think jumping sometimes works.
Yeah, right. One of the things that I was wondering while you were talking about that is, um, you have children that are still relatively young, if I understood correctly, and so I wonder how, and you were talking about the COVID situation. How do you communicate that to your children about like that life and death situation, and it's not a big deal, and because they're probably still quite young, and I remember myself as a kid being like, yeah, mom, whatever. How do you communicate that to your children?
Mm, I get the yeah, mom, however. Um, so I mean, I try, right? Because it's not because I try, it's part of me. When I go back to my past, it just comes up. And I think the first time it came up, my son was studying about the Civil War in the United States, right? So it's like um, and I said, oh my God, actually, I've been in a civil war and this is what we did. And he was like, oh, my mom, you're so cool. My mom is so cool. You're actually so real moms. I was like, okay, this is not what I wanted to.
Yeah.
um, and I mean, now, of course, when I tell them, well, again, now I sound so old, but when they say like, oh, I have to walk to the bus, I was like, you're so lucky. Right? You actually go to school every day and there's a bus and, you have all of this stuff. And this is when they start saying, it's like, they look at each other. So they're 9 and 14 now. So they communicate, right? They're not. And so they look at us like, oh, here she goes with her drama. It's like but I tell them, like, we studied on, what do you call it? The candlelight, right?
Yeah.
So you had to do your homework. I say this to them, the same thing. It's like, we had to do the homework as soon as we came back because there's no electricity later. So, you want to get it when there's light
Mm.
outside. Yeah, that's all just like too much drama. And I think what my friends tell me is eventually it sinks in. When
Yeah.
they're older, it sinks in, just like you, hopefully.
Well, I'd be lying if there wasn't times I still say yeah, mom. But yeah, I can also imagine that in a way that's like one of the best things that you can wish to your children is that they don't even need to worry about having gone through that. That the fact that they don't realize it is probably, the best thing that you could hope
Yeah,
for them in a way, having gone through what you've gone, and the fact that they don't have to.
yeah. I did. So my son, my older son is in high school now, and we went to the high school open house, and that actually it it, it actually made me tear up because I've never experienced anything like this. So this is an American school, and they had all these clubs, and you can join the debate club and the chess club. And of course, they're so blasé. Like him and his friends, there's like so typical teenagers, like yeah, right? I was like, you have no idea how amazing that you actually have all of this at age
Mm.
14 as part of a structured, safe environment. That's the school. It's amazing. Um, so yeah, I don't know. We'll see. Time will tell.
Yeah,
Time
yeah,
will
yeah, of
tell.
course, for sure.
Yeah.
Um, so you you come to the US in so I take it you studied the GIS
Yes.
master at MIT. What kind of happens after that?
So first of all, as I was looking at the other three, because this happened recently, and I was like, uh, maybe I'm the lowest paid amongst the four. This tells you something about GIS. But what happened? MIT is an amazing place, right? I keep saying it was, my Disneyland, right? So you go in. I mean, we got to meet Stephen Hawking, like literally meet him,
Mm,
not just like listen to him.
mm,
Your professor is the guy, or the guy, mostly the guy who
yeah.
wrote the book, right? And it's all so new, right?
Mm,
And you're exposed to so many cultures. So it's just like amazing. And I was in the, so that program was in the Department of Urban Planning and Civil Engineering, right? So it's like, because what is GIS, right? I think even right now, it's like this thing that, it's also in the Earth Observation Department, a little bit computer science. But that thing enables you to connect with all these, other departments, other people who are not like you. So actually my biggest shock when I got to MIT and doing the GIS and the urban studies group, I'm like, I'm an engineer. I do things, I build things, and these people talk about planning stuff. I was like, no, tell me what to do. And we sort of, you start to meet in the middle. You need the community part. You need the engagement. You need to figure out the different ways you can shape things, and then you use the technology, right, to I think do the simulations for all of this. And that was actually not easy for me, because I was like, 1 + 1 = 2. Let's do it. Let's go, right? And I think it fascinates me sometimes when I catch myself, like even when I talk about OGC, how actually my language has shifted from the technology to now I'm like talking about, it's consensus based. The way you do consensus based standards is by bringing people together. And I was like, oh my God, how did I shift? And you talk about maturing, and I wonder what they thought about me back then. It was like, look at this engineer, she thinks she knows everything. And so yeah, I did. And my God, I think I like, they tell you go to MIT and it's a fire hose, and I like drank like a hungry or thirsty person. I took, courses. I retook some courses I took in undergrad just because I could, like electromagnetics and, statistics and probability. It was like, ooh, I want to see how they, how they say it, right? And I supported myself as well by teaching. So I taught the very first, this is how old I am, my God, the very first Java class at MIT. So yeah, which is so cool. And I had a team, I think, of 10 people. We wrote, I mean, there were no books at the time, so we wrote our own thing. And so that was a fascinating experience. And that experience, in my mind, you talk about career path, I so wanted to be a professor. And then teaching that Java class made me realize that this is not what I want to do.
What happened?
I can do something once or twice. I cannot do it anymore. I get bored. I cannot. I just like, you're off, you go. Good luck to you. Yeah. So yeah, and then I ended up doing my PhD there. And my advisor at the time, he said, let's do the web services, right? And we started down those web services. And that was exactly when web services were like taking over almost, but not yet in the geospatial. I was like, okay, I have to finish my PhD before, OGC does their web services, right? Because now we have a whole web services suite. And that's how I intersected with OGC for the very first time. And I got stuck. It's like, yeah, so I think that was, yeah, the MIT experience, definitely great. And when I say I took everything, I did even, I enrolled in the dance troupe at MIT, even though I was like the oldest one, but I didn't care. I was like, I want to do this. I did my aerobic certification. So that's how I ended up doing the jazzercise stuff. I toured, we created a Lebanese club at MIT, and we had a folkloric dance troupe. And we toured all over the US to perform. So it's like, it's this exactly, it's like when you say like, what did you do? It's like, I tried to do everything that I could.
So that's one of the things that I wanted to bring up is dance. It seems like it had an important and still has an important role in your life, and that's exactly why I want to have these conversations is to try to understand a little bit what was appealing, back then for you in that, and what role has it had, and because it seems like it's a big part, but not necessarily one that a lot of people see very often. But people are multitude, and so yeah, I just wanted to talk a little bit about that.
I love to dance. I've always loved to dance. I actually, sometimes I wonder if I grew up in a place like the United States, if I would have gone into theater or something like that, because I like to sing, I like to dance, I like to choreograph. So who knows, right? So this is like you do the best with what you have, and it's uh, it's been great to me because one, it's my me time, right?
Yeah.
It's my me time. And maybe this is also another thing about me. It's like, oh, I love to do this. Let me do this. Like, no, I'm gonna go teach the class because I'm that crazy. And it was like, because I don't have enough to do. But part of it is, again, when I want to do something, I just do it to the extreme. So when I found Jazzercise, I loved it. I was like, okay, I want to be an instructor. I want to own a franchise. And it's been great to me because it filled so many gaps in my life. There's the gap of course, just like doing something you love, so it's easy. There's the gap of you having to be on stage, right, almost
Hmm.
every day to perform with 60 people, 30 to 60 people actually, and live. So you trip. Uh, and I used to be shy, so that got me
Right.
over, and it helps you improvise because it's live, like you observe what people are doing and you give cues accordingly. So it's a combination of teaching, and it combines many things. The friendship.
Right.
So another thing that happened when I moved to DC, I literally, so I moved to DC because my brother got accepted to Gallaudet University, and he's deaf, and he had never been outside of Lebanon, does not speak English. We didn't know American Sign Language, just like so many things. Like, okay, we
Right.
need to be next to him. I'm in DC. I know nobody, but I got a job. I got a job at NASA at the time. That's great. No women. No women.
Hmm.
It's like, how am I gonna make friends, right? Because you're working all day. So
Yeah.
actually, Jazzercise, they were all professional women. So now I have this amazing, diverse group of women as my friends, and we've been together for what, like, 15 years, which is amazing. So that's been really good. And the last interesting thing I've even given when I did my aviation business a few years ago, I actually, because I own a franchise, Jazzercise is a franchise. So there's a business aspect to it.
Yeah.
And I actually use that. So when we do, we're going through the rebranding of OGC, for example, and I think our marketing director maybe humors me, but I give examples from the rebranding that we did at Jazzercise. They're a 50-year-old organization that
Right.
was trying to modernize. OGC is 25-year-old. We're trying to modernize. Same thing with the how you deal with your customers. How do you keep them? So the whole idea of retention and attraction and customer service and planning, right? You don't show up to a class not prepared. And you compete with other instructors and with other franchise and with
Right.
other programs. So to me, that whole business aspect, it's weird that I find myself sometimes going back to it because simple examples. Can we give um, can we give a discount right, on this membership or this event. And I just then go back to my jazzercise experience, even though it's a totally different business, right, at a totally different level, but you have the lessons learned. It was like, actually, the data shows that this doesn't do anything, because at the end of the day, when people join an organization or buy a product, it's not about the money. If they're convinced about the value, then it's not about the money. And that's not where the conversation should be. And you definitely should not give it away for free. So same thing, it's like, you should put value on what you're offering, whether it's a dance class or whether it's a
Yeah, yeah.
membership or whether it's your product, right? Or your data. So it's friends, dancing, business. It's good stuff.
And what the first thing that came in my mind is, like, you just said that you didn't like teaching Java at MIT, and here you are saying that one of the things that you love doing outside of work is teaching dance. How is that different? It's probably a dumb question, but I'm still curious to ask.
No, it's so I by the way, I was like what was it? I was one of the top 100 instructors in the world, and I think it's for a reason, because I rarely I can't say never. I rarely teach the exact same class. And I think that's the difference. I control every class. I change the type of music, the artists, the moves, the sequence of things, right? So it keeps your creative brains working. So I'm not, and I know with Java, maybe you can change the problem set and whatever, but you can't do it every day. I go back to the getting bored part. So yeah, I think these days, sadly, because I have kids and because I have kids, I do end up, doing the same set a few times because there's just no time. But in general, this is what keeps you looking forward to it, because it's not, you don't want to do the same thing, right? So again, it's like this is a combination of you're exercising, you're a little bit performing, but also you're putting something together. You're creating something new, literally every day.
And yeah, that resonates. One of the things that I also wanted to ask is, you actually started a few businesses yourself, more in line with the geospatial aspect, if I understood correctly.
Yeah.
I tried looking a little bit. I didn't find that much info on them. Could you walk me through what they were, and kind of what the journey was there?
Yeah. So it's two businesses, right? One of them was back. So I was a contractor at NASA, and I think at the time I looked around and I said, I can do this myself. So let me start my own consulting business. And I had my best friend with me. And we did great for, I think, what was it, like 3-4 years, which was consulting on geospatial interoperability and how do you apply the standards and how do you upgrade your architecture so that it's standards based or that it's interoperable. How do you test that? Honestly, it's everything that I'm still doing now, right? But it was a consulting business. But so a couple of things about consulting, it's not scalable, right? It's like
Okay.
it's your time. I don't know if I can say this on a podcast, but I'll say this.
Like,
But uh,
could you at
yeah,
least elaborate what you mean by that?
yeah. All right. This is how so consulting. I hope nobody gets offended who's listening, but
That's why I want us to take the time about it, because I think a
yeah,
lot of the time it happens when you take it out of context. So
yes,
let's put some
yes,
context there, and try to elaborate there, because that's what's
yes,
interesting to hear is what you think about it.
yeah. So somebody told me once, and it clicked with me. That's why it's like a prostitution, but for your brains. That's why I was like, right? That's
Okay.
why it's not scalable, right?
Right.
Because when you specialize in a niche, and I think we did it early on. I think if I had to start this business today, it would be very different because
Okay.
the world is different, right? The
Right.
market is different, but at the time it was definitely a very niche that you have to be really good at so that somebody can take you seriously. So I cannot have like 10 people like me, right? Then it doesn't scale. And that's where like that prostitution is like you only have so much bandwidth in
Right.
your brain, so how do it just doesn't scale. And it's intense, right, as a small business. And I hate to say this, it's again, at the time, women owned businesses, and I know
Mm.
there are a lot of efforts on encouraging women, whatever. I think it was not even at the time. I think we did it again, I think maybe too early.
Okay.
There wasn't like, I'm a woman owned, not that. Again, I want that, because that also annoys me. Just like, don't pick me because I'm a woman.
Yeah. Right.
Like, my God, I have so much to offer. And that's not easy at all, because business, even today, I'll say it, business is still being done in sort of a manly way. I don't know how to say
Okay.
this.
What do you mean by that?
um, it's connections, right?
Okay.
Right? It's business is all about connections. But when you're entering a market new, right, you don't have the connections and all the connections because you're sitting on legacy of whatever the last 50 years of work, right, in that domain. It's all been men connecting to each other,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you don't have the initial connections to start with. So you cannot call somebody and get your way in. Again, I think these days, with the internet or Twitter or social media and LinkedIn, we're sort of, especially with the pandemic, I think those dynamics are changing.
Right.
And you can actually rise, and have people connect to you versus going back to
Right.
connect to them.
Yeah. That's what I
Um,
wanted to ask.
yeah.
How do you see that changing? Do you see anything else that needs to be put in place or is going on that is changing that dynamic?
Um, so this, I think, what we're doing here, right, even in this podcast, and I think all my friends that I've never met on social media, is we are showing the value of what we're doing, right?
Right.
Which so at the time, to be honest with you, and it was a frustrating thing. Uh, I said it one day. I was like, "Oh my God, I feel like every day I have to justify what I'm doing
Right.
again and again to the same people because the value was not clicking, the impact was not obvious. They didn't hear it everywhere. Now, right? You're buzzing about it. We're buzzing about it. Everybody's buzzing about this. So that's
Mm.
like, actually, you'll feel dumb if you say, "Oh, I don't know what you're talking about."
Right.
It's the
Okay.
opposite. It's like, "Oh, can you explain to me how it benefits me?" It's like the
Right.
conversation, especially when we're talking about consulting, you're starting already at a more advanced stage of the conversation because you're not explaining things from zero. You're not
Right.
having to make the case for, you know, satellite data. I mean, this is what we were doing at NASA. It's like satellite data, and we were dealing with NOAA, which is weather data. Again, it's
Right.
like that whole thing, which is really great. I think that's what's changed.
Do you think that's still the case, by the way, today as well? Like because that has changed. Like if you were to have those conversations again on the satellite data,
Mm,
but on yourself as well,
mm,
do you see things having changed a lot? 'Cause I'm just here. I've been doing this for like
mm.
so little time that I wouldn't be able to tell you.
Things obviously have changed because look at all these businesses,
Right.
right? And the influx, for example, at OGC is we have it's very refreshing. It's all these small businesses that nobody has heard of, but they're doing all of this. And this tells you because they can, because now there's this enough of a foundation, right, that we can, and I mean we all of us can support all these startups. There's
Right.
definitely, that's a huge change. Now, the other thing that I makes me think nowadays is, um, I think we've all been saying geospatial is mainstream, it's everywhere, everybody's heard of it,
Hmm.
and um, sometimes it's being interpreted as, yeah, it's everywhere, so why do I need to talk to you? So we sort of are
Ah,
missing, it's everywhere, but it's not done. It's
right.
this, and I think and I now I'm seeing it. I love again just following some of those. I've become a Twitter person during the pandemic because why not? Uh, I'm starting to see people. It's like, yeah, it's complex. So it is everywhere because the potential is everywhere, because the data has all of the location, but the leveraging, the creating the value, it's not everywhere. That's why there's an industry.
Right.
That's
So
why we're here. And we missed, I feel like we missed explaining that part, and now we're having to explain it.
okay. So we went too fast, you mean? Like in the kind of how common it became?
It's I think how we communicated it,
Okay.
right? I was at an event, I think now last year, where they brought in some expert in branding, and they said, the geospatial has a branding problem. And this is, I think, part of this communication. It's like, yeah, it's there, but there's it's not done.
Right.
That's the problem. Geospatial is mainstream. That's great. And then they move on. It's like, no, 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 no. So it's not too fast. We had to do it, right? Because we were
Yeah.
there, but it's part of the evolution, I think. Just the maturity, maybe.
So let's get into the OGC. So you're currently the CEO of the OGC. I don't think we actually even mentioned that so far.
Mm,
Um, what does that mean? What is your role there? What is how does that kind of solve the problem that we just mentioned
mm.
here?
Um, so um, I feel very fortunate to be the CEO of OGC these days, because I really think these are special days, right? You're not coming in to maintain something,
Right.
and you're also not coming in to just grow something. We're all transforming. That's part of, like, we go back to the ambition, you need excitement. And this is so exciting because I think my role, I feel my role, I'll just say it. Some people say never say I feel something because this is business, but
Well, I say it
it's
way too much, so let's go for it.
um, so I feel that a big part of my job is evolving the consortium. It's 27 years old, right? And like everything, I think the premise of why it was there is evolving,
Okay.
right? And so I think part of my job is actually to support this geospatial is mainstream, right? Because for the last 27, it was not mainstream. And we cannot assume that everything we're doing and how we're doing it will just work because it's mainstream,
Mhm.
right? You have to do things differently. So part of my job is, and I tell them we're changing OGC to meet the requirements of this new world from the inside out. So it's modernizing the standards themselves. It's also acknowledging that it's not just about standards. So now I'm
Okay.
flipping even how we define OGC. So OGC, if you listened, again, for like 25 years, or even Google it, it would say OGC is a standards development organization for geospatial. And nowadays, it's more, we're a problem-solving community.
Okay.
We use our geospatial expertise, right? And we're trying to make this information that's related to location fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable, by us getting together, right, from all over the world, from government, industry, academia, all of this, to solve problem. That's why you got to start with the problem solving.
Right.
Guess what comes out? We start to agree on the standards. It becomes, a byproduct of
Right.
people getting in the same room and trying to solve a specific problem where they connect, not where they compete,
So
right?
if I understand correctly, to try to rephrase, you're saying
Mm.
the the standard is not like the heart of it. The heart of it is trying to solve a problem, and it so turns out that having standards is a way to solve some of those problems when so many people come work together.
Yeah, it comes out like you cannot have the standard without the people, right?
Right.
And the standard is useless without the where it's could be used without the problem. And I think part of, again, back to my job is also realizing that when you bring the community together to solve these, interoperability, connectivity, integration challenges, the standards, yes, but also I'm increasingly seeing best practices. So these are
Ah,
not
okay.
standards, like best practices, and also let's call them the leave behind, like proofs of concept. I mean, we spend a lot of time, trying things out, and increasingly, again, this is when I say part of my job is the evolution. It's not documenting what we've done in a report. It's actually leaving behind, I don't know, Python scripts and Jupyter notebooks and, some open source code on some blueprints for doing some workflows. And I think the combination becomes standards, best practices. I call them proofs of concept, I don't know, until somebody comes up with a better name. Then that becomes, what OGC offers, but it's because the people and the organizations came together and said, we have an issue.
Right.
And this is why, and I honestly, it changes things a lot, because instead of saying, we're getting together and it's a committee to do the next, I don't know, indoor, ML, right? Indoor GML. It's like, which is great, right? But it becomes as like, we're getting together because I have this indoor data and I'm trying to give it to the public safety, people for evacuation purposes, and this other guy has the Internet of Things all over. And how do I do this? Then come out of it comes out like, oh, maybe you need an indoor GML 2.0, and you need
Right.
the sensor things, and oh, by the way, they need to be APIs because it's the only way I can combine them. um,
So do you see
yeah.
that also as a source of kind of prioritizing what needs to be worked on by having that? Because I can imagine that
Mm,
one of the challenges is also how do you create that link between the people who are using these tools and
mm,
having these issues and knowing what to build for them to
yeah,
help them.
this is an amazing question and very, very difficult, because this is the challenge, because part of it is it comes as a result. I mean, it's like, Yahoo, geospatial is mainstream, right? And it's like, oh my God, now I have to support the whole world. I used to support, you know, right? With the same resources, because everybody is, we don't have unlimited resources. So yes, that's why I say bingo on the prioritization. And you can see it sort of bubbling. It's a very hard problem because it bubbles up where some things are like, duh, right? Like disasters, right? So that's why you see us doing disaster pilots, climate change, because it's a priority. It's not a technical priority. It's not even one community priority. It's a
Mm,
human priority, and
yeah.
you're trying to solve that. So this is almost easy, right? The issue is because geospatial is mainstream, And the world moves very quickly these days. So they're not waiting on you anymore to develop the API. It's just like people are running, which again also scares me that 5 years from now, you know, they're gonna come back and say, "Oh my God, I have these 5 systems and they don't work together," and I'm here saying, can we do it, right? But where was I going with this? The world is moving fast, and if geospatial is everywhere, you start to have these challenges that are agriculture specific, smart city specific, transportation specific, energy specific, right? And I go back to limited resources. Like, so seriously, how do you prioritize? And now I've started, this is why we have partnerships, because we can also not claim, yes, we're geospatial, location, call us whatever you want to call us, right? We're experts at this, place and time. But we're not experts in all of these other domains, right? So it puts, again, the initial question is like, we need to partner more in some meaningful ways so that we can ensure that these communities have what they need from us.
Right.
And it scales, because again, you see it all the time. I mean, business is business. People get a contract and they do it, and that's great. It works for 2 years. But what we're trying to do is to make something sustainable, especially when you think about smart cities, for example, right? It's like, yeah, it's not a smart city product. We're trying to have a smart city such that maybe it's crazy, but it's not. It's also extensible. It supports any new sensor.
Right.
You don't want to just keep doing this over and over again.
So the next question I kind of have on that is, once you kind of decide what needs to be prioritized and you kind of work on it, how do you make sure people use it? How does it become applicable? How do people, start picking it up?
So two things. When you decide, it's actually, I've started to say this recently. It's like, we don't decide, you decide. Right? That's the beauty of a consortium that's member driven, right? It's, and when it's a consortium, it's essentially, it's the community saying,
Right.
I need this, and this is how much I'm willing to put of my data or of my effort or of my funding to actually, my team, to make it happen. And I think flipping the concept of OGC, starting with the problem solving, all the way leading you to the standards, is what makes the standards. We don't have then to make the case for using the standard. You don't have to go like, please use this. It's like, no, because you sat down here together and said you have this problem, and we're saying this is part of the problem and the best practice on how to use it, and here's some stuff. So the adoption becomes a little bit smoother, right? Natural, because you started because they came to you, or you noticed that there's a problem. So when you solve it and you solve it together, it gets picked up. The other part of your question is, this is why we're focusing so much on developers, right? So developer is king. And even in my business, we didn't talk about it, this aviation business, which is okay, we don't have to talk about it.
I actually do want to talk about, we can bring it up after, but I really do want to talk about that actually.
Yeah. Yes. So again, I lost my train of thought again. This is like my mind buzzing.
You're mentioning how you want to focus on developers as well.
Yeah. So we used to say developer is king, right? And now that I'm OGC, I totally see it. And so what we've heard is, eventually this decision to use a standard, right, it's not the CEO of the company.
Yeah.
This is when we're talking about using the standard. When you talk about developing a standard, yes, it's the CEO, because that's a strategy for them to get bigger market share, to get into new markets, to partner with other people, to find the next best startup or the next person who's going to acquire them or the next customer, right? So that's a strategic decision. But the usage, if you think about it, the CEO doesn't come and say, you shall use XML. It's like, no, go away, right?
Yep.
Um, and what we've heard and experienced, right, is at the end of the day, you have a project and you have your developers and they Google and they see what's available out there, right? So you have to, and this is how they end up adopting the WMS, for example. Because again, it just bubbles up because it's
Right.
being used and it works, and we keep evolving it because of their feedback. So this focus on the developers right now for the API, again, flipping things on their head,
Yeah.
talk about what am I doing here? It's this whole idea is we're doing the whole modernization with the open APIs and the OGC APIs, and not starting with a committee that sits down and
Yeah.
looks at all the use cases and every possible combination and every possible CRS and every possible ways of intersecting and all of this. It's from the bottom up.
Right.
These developers are already working on their own products. They bring their issues, and it bubbles up to the point where first of all, the standard is being developed collaboratively, and I mean by rolling their sleeves and just
Yeah.
doing it. And then the standard, when you get it as a document, if you want to think about it, or something that you read and use, right? It's not a document anymore. It's just the documentation of what these guys have gone through and agreed that this is what we've gone through. And now
Yeah.
it, yeah,
I feel like, when I look at how I work on a day to day, it's kind of brutal in a way. It's like if this takes more than 5 minutes or something, I'll just do it myself in a
yep,
kind of way, because that's part of the job. You're like building stuff and kind of hacking your way half the time. So that totally resonates that, yeah, there's something about like, this is how it's being agreed on to be done. And then you're like, sure, but I'm just not going to do it like that because it takes way too much time, or
yeah,
it's impractical, or whatever. So I can totally relate to that from the other side
yeah.
of what you
And we
do.
need to hear that, right? So now we have for the first time, OGC has a developer
Right.
on board, and uh, it's Dr. Simon, and um, it's a big experiment. I keep telling her it's definitely a big experiment. But we're trying to get as close as possible to the developers, because if they encounter what you just encountered, we want to hear about it. So that's why we're doing all these developer workshops. So these are opportunities to come and say, I tried this, it didn't work, or look, I did it better. And there's a
Right.
lot of that because this is also a developer culture, right? Um, so that's definitely, yeah, you talk about changes. This is one of the big ones.
Can I ask how many people work at OGC?
Um, 27.
Okay, right. That's
Yeah.
that's less than I thought, actually.
Yeah, it's weird thinking about OGC because we're 27 as staff, but what, like 540 as members,
Right.
and this is as organizations. And standards are developed on the backs of volunteers at the end of the day, on the back of its passion, right?
Yeah.
And that's why it's like the 27 does not reflect all the volunteers that actually
Hmm.
develop the standards, because we don't sit down and develop them. It's actually
Right.
the members, right?
So, and that, how does that work in that case, where how do you keep up with that conversation that's happening there about all these 540 people that might be voicing those concerns, or trying to participate? That sounds like a lot of people also to try and to you at the top of that, talking about the strategy, as you were saying, that's the role of the CEO. How do you make sense of all of that and kind of end up deciding we're going, this way or that way?
With difficulty. um, because again, this is one of the challenge. So what we've done, so one of the things I've also did at OGC when we talk about changing from the inside is we now, I think like everybody else have an annual planning cycle, but we have a 10-year vision and a 5-year
Okay.
vision and a 3-year vision. And then you get to the 1 year. So you go back. And then we meet as a leadership team every quarter to look at exactly, what are the priorities. So if you've watched us in the last 6 months, or what are we now, September? So the last 9 months, you'll definitely see space rising as a high priority, however you define it, because it's not one thing and it
Okay.
intersects with so many other things. Defense and intelligence as well. So this is from the themes. Agriculture. So you see those
Right.
because again, this is where the energy is and the problem that we need to solve. When you look at, speaking of the problem, you see us, looking at the disasters. You see us looking at marine. So this is like, integration of data, sea to land to air to space, right? Which is, again, as human beings, this is where we're going as countries. So you see the global, I think, maybe issues
Mm-hmm.
totally bubbling up. Um, and then you rely on, I have them on my board. So you can see them, but the listeners can't because it has a lot of other things as well.
Yeah, there's a
Um,
board behind you that you're pointing to.
yes. But we have the high level members at OGC. So we have our, principal members.
Right.
So um, it's about, 12 organizations that sit on our planning committee. So they help us, because they're the ones like Google and Microsoft and AWS and
Right.
Esri and
Big
Hexagon and
players.
Trimble. So they see, right? So I don't have to see everything. They see
Okay.
because they're everywhere and they're in everything. And then we have a strategic committee, which is even a level higher. And the strategic committee is only 6 members, and that's the NASA and the ESA and the NGA, DHS, USGS, UK Ordnance Survey. So you sort of see also the government perspective
Mm-hmm.
in that committee, because these are the people who are investing in this experimentation. They bring the problems. I mean, we're talking right now on, about beyond SDI. What does it mean to have a spatial data infrastructure? Like,
Okay.
what's that? Because everything is everywhere and everybody's so you get these guys to tell you as well. These are our guys who link us to organizations or initiatives like the UN, right?
Okay.
Because we're doing amazing things, but sometimes we forget the developing world, and the divide is even bigger
Yeah.
in terms of tools and data and you name it, and skills, right? Um, it's intense. I mean, I'm not gonna, it's a very intense job
I
because
can
it's
imagine.
you're prioritizing, but you have you're everywhere. If you're
Yeah.
starting with geospatial is everywhere, you cannot say sorry. I wish I can help you, but at the same time, you really want it, and I tell them now. I even said it yesterday in our board of directors. It's not OGC is doing. It's like I'm not doing anything. If you want something done, it's you are OGC, right?
Mm.
There is no, it's not like somebody's doing this for the community. No, it's you're doing it for you. And I'm just the middleman barely, right? And I try to hit on that point when people say, and you hear that as well. It's like when OGC develops, a standard for, I don't know, GeoAI or has a best practice, I'll use it. I was like, who is OGC? If
Right.
you're not going to develop it, I'm not the GeoAI expert. You are, if you
Right.
have a business on that, right? And I think, again, we talk about the messaging. It's just like we're all in this together, not it's not just for the pandemic, but if we're gonna truly have geospatial is everywhere, we have to work together.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the um, interesting things that I've seen that I didn't expect but actually makes sense is I think Epic is working with you guys, the
Mm,
video game like company. And at first I was like, oh, this is interesting, but kind of digging into it, this is a very different application of geospatial that we might be used to if we're in this field. So they're this huge, yeah, video game company that has been working
yeah.
now with OGC, if I understood correctly. Um, so that's also a field that I'm quite interested in, and I kind of wanted to ask you, is that something that you're seeing more and more, where it's like fields that might not have necessarily been very tied to the whole concept of geospatial that are like, hey, actually, we're having these same problems as well, but I'm guessing they don't have the same constraints and problems in a way that when you're trying to make a video game, it's more about how it looks than necessarily how accurate it is, but it's still geospatial.
Yeah.
So how does that kind of work?
So first of all, it's this Epic Games joining OGC made me a hero in front of my kids because it's like,
Oh yeah,
oh
I
my
bet.
God, my mom was working. And then I was on this panel with Cesium. I think I have to give
Yeah.
credit to Patrick Cozy, because I think he's the one who really made that connection. And he organized this event at SIGGRAPH. And we had the Roblox, I don't know, chief scientist or CTO.
Okay.
And they had Epic Games, and oh my God, my kids, they were like, I mean, this is it. You're so cool. Uh, but I think, again, this is a reflection of the maturity of what we're trying to do. And
Okay.
the realization, again, from the games, and this is, again, there's the entertainment games, but also there's the serious gaming. And if you take, just between parentheses, the serious gaming stuff, right, for I don't know, battle plans and all of this, geospatial has always been a big part of defense and geoint, right? So now this is just the expansion also, because they're realizing, instead of making up the worlds, I can actually now use all this data that
Yeah.
we already have, and it integrates. So why not? So it's win-win if you think about it.
Mm-hmm.
And when Patrick, for example, did this demo, and it's such a simple, it's like barely a minute demo, but it shows you, where we're going. So it was a drone that was flying over and taking pictures or video, and then it flies over the ocean and it turns around. But I mean, so simple, right? We're used to Hollywood, except every single bit of data was real, right? So because we're at a point, and this is what, like, I was blown away, the ocean, right? It was not a fake wave, blah, blah, blah. They were using the model, right, to actually model the ocean waves at this, a place at this time, because we have the modeling data. I mean,
Yeah.
geospatial
Yeah.
has been
Right.
doing. And I think that's the realization from the gaming, right? That we can actually integrate this and imagine the power of having, the real data. Because when
Mm.
you go to the metaverse, it is eventually, real and virtual. It's not all fake. So when you're in the game, right, and you've seen, oh my God, I mean, those events are amazing. You talk about other things to do, because now from these events, I get people from Hollywood, right, connecting, because it's like, oh, it's like, my God, just take me to the Oscar. I'll give you whatever you want, right? It's like, but it's fascinating because they're seeing the potential. We're
Right.
able as a community to demonstrate, right, to show them, what could be done. But then it brings me back to, it's not a fait accompli. It's not actually done. It's a demonstration. If you really want to link, the ocean models, with the drone models, with
Yeah.
the imagery, with was like we haven't done that yet. It's like and this is again when we get ahead of ourselves,
Yeah.
and it becomes, I think we're good, really your question, because we're geospatial and location is in many things, we have grown up um, appreciating interoperability and integration, and we're good at it. So that's why it's translating nicely into
Hmm.
all these other domains. And we're almost like we've seen this before
Right.
and
Yeah.
we can do this.
I've
Yeah.
sorry. I've watched some developer conferences at of like studios that do that, and it's really interesting to hear them talk about how they approach photogrammetry, for example. Where if you look at a company that's trying to do photogrammetry to create an elevation model, it's basically the same technology, but it feels like you're hearing two completely different worlds. Do you see also that as them bringing a new perspective on the work that you might be doing?
They're challenging us, right?
Right.
It's a new perspective and a challenge, and hopefully we learn from them as much they learn from us.
Hmm.
Um, because one of the demos that somebody sent me, it's from a Marvel movie that we've all watched, and I had no idea, right, that they've done this with
Mm.
like geospatial data. If I can find that link, it was presented at a GeoEnt conference actually, maybe last
Okay.
year. I'll share it with you. But yeah, because their perspective is, and it goes back to our earlier conversation about, you know, the developers and the
Yeah.
accessibility of the standards. Like, we're trying to make them not geospatial, because these guys, when they're looking for something, it's like geospatial bleh, right? Just give me something that I need
Yeah.
to use.
Yeah.
So
Right.
we need to
That's a great
bridge
point.
the terminology, right? And I hope they have a lot of lessons learned, like all the streaming of 3D data. They're challenging us so that we can put it in our data so we can stream it to anybody,
Right.
right?
That's that's actually really nice to hear that's also what we're trying to do is making it a part and not necessarily the central portion of it. It's kind of like when you build something with a database, it's not a database product. It's just using a database.
Yeah. Mm.
Um, so um, I actually did want to talk about, let's move on a little bit and go towards the aviation part of your career. Like that's something that I want to know a little bit more about because I also come from there. That's what I studied. I studied aerospace mechanical engineering and then kind of moved on. And so, yeah, I wanted to know if you could tell me a little bit about how that was and see where we can go from there.
Yeah.
What were you doing
Um,
in the aviation industry?
so I was, at the time, I was doing a project with OGC.
Okay.
So I used to be, years ago, the executive director of the innovation program. And at the time, Eurocontrol and FAA, the ANSPs essentially of the US and Europe, came to OGC because they needed a new exchange format, a new exchange model, actually, for aviation data, aeronautics data
Okay.
across the continents, right? So we worked on that. We had an aeronautical model, a weather model, a flight model, and we go back to this bug of like, you know, I need to do something new. And I said, you know, let's try to do this, not just develop the standard, but actually see if we can use it in real life. And you know, a friend of mine was the founder of this small business in the UK, and he said, you know, we're expanding, do you want to be the CEO? And I said, go back to the jump. I jumped. I said yes, even though no money, right? There was like
Right.
nothing, there was no business. Um, and that was fascinating because again, it's about you're transforming an industry. So these guys have been stuck, you know, for, you know, in the 1970s, and we were talking about web services and JMS, and then, you know, we went to the cloud and Kubernetes, and everything I say is new, right,
Mm.
within that domain. And I still remember the very first time we did a demo, you know, and to us, geospatial people, it was like, here's a flight and here's an airspace, and you can detect if the flight is gonna, just because you know where things are going. It's like, because that whole industry was based on IDs, right? The airspace has an ID, and
Yeah.
that's why you have, air traffic controllers. That's what they study. I mean, it's fascinating, what you can do when it's just you track something in space and time, and you can then predict it. So it was an amazing experience, because I learned all about cloud deployment and how do you build on the cloud and how do you use AWS and Google, and Kubernetes was like a bad word at the end because we were like so deep in it. And the on-premise and on the cloud and all of
Right.
that. And we did the RESTful. So like actually RESTful for aviation data is like, wow. And we had the most amazing customers, from, the Boeing to the Eurocontrol
Right.
to the FAA. It's fascinating, right? When you're in the middle of a transformation, you're
Right.
genuinely transforming. And I think that's why I'm attracted. That's what I'm attracted to. Okay, this is an aha moment, but maybe I like this stuff. The flip side of that is this was an industry of giants
Yeah.
that have been there forever, and you're coming here to transform. So we were very lucky. I grew the business to, actually the US office made, most of the revenues by the end. I mean, so it was very successful, but you're, I don't know if it's even a tiny fish.
Yeah.
It's definitely not an easy business. You go back to, you're sort of infiltrating that, and we were very well received, or not very well received. We
Okay.
got an innovation award, and all of that. Um, but again, you're going against giants. I have to say it again. You talk about old white men. Oh my
Yeah.
God, right? Like, the conferences, the events, every meeting, it's very intimidating because they have a history that you don't have. Um, uh, but my God, it's just, I feel like I've learned so much
Right.
because you were not doing anything that anybody else is doing.
Right.
And it gives you this appreciation of big data and working with even, government agencies that are, it's difficult to change legacy. It's really difficult.
Yeah. That's kind of interesting to hear you talk about. Like, it's exactly the way I felt about it. It's this like aviation in itself is not very old. It's like 100+ years. It's not that old compared to agriculture, for example, and yet it feels very kind of thought out already. But the reason is also because, and I think that's something that you said on another interview that you had. It's kind of a life or death situation pretty much all the time. So there's a reason why all of everything is so well battle tested. Basically, it's because we know that there's like 17 different fail safes before something goes wrong, and so changing any of those means that you have to prove that it is as good or better. um, so do you see that also, like when I came back actually in kind of the software side and seeing like, yeah, testing is like something we do if we have time. Like, is there things that you also took from there that you see that we can apply from that field basically into the geospatial kind of world that exists today?
Uh, totally. So I think I didn't really learn my lesson until I joined Northrop Grumman. So my
Okay.
Northrop Grumman experience is really eye-opening because I've never worked for a company that large. It's like 75,000 people. I mean, it's huge, and they do the big systems and the big, I mean, the telescopes to the planes to whatever, to the rockets, not no planes. But and this is when I learned actually, and I hope I brought it to OGC as well, that going from a prototype that works, that's tested, is a long way actually from being operational at
Yeah.
scale. especially in critical situations
Mm-hmm.
or safety critical situations. And that process is, I think, why the organizations like Northrop Grumman exists, right? Because the process is so thorough. And again, this is when I learned all about DevSecOps, and so even that is evolving these days, right?
Right.
The way we're doing the testing that is being done as you're developing, but there's still this combination of agile and waterfall, so that you can get to things like you're saying. I mean, if a plane falls, it falls. This is, and if I give it the wrong data, right? I mean, yes, you can be a small business and I can show all amazing demos, and you can get all the way to the door, and then you say, I can give you the weather data, but like, weather is the most important thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I'm gonna test it a
Yeah,
gazillion
yeah, yeah.
ways, right? Because first, it's not broken.
That's
Planes
true.
are
That's
not
a great point.
falling, right? So you're solving efficiency problems, and you're trying to get ahead. Your efficiency and capacity problems, right? Um, but you don't want to mess with a system that's actually working, because we don't hear a plane falling. You don't hear they got the wrong data. But the amazing thing to me was when I at the time, one of the drivers is the pilots were actually saying, there's something wrong when I'm the pilot in the plane and I have my EFB, which was the electronic flight bag, developed and the passenger, all my passengers have their iPhones, they have better data, better user interface, more timely data. Something is wrong. Something is wrong.
Well, yeah, the thing, maybe playing devil's advocate here is
Mhm.
I feel like um also that's specifically true in the space sector. I feel like one of the things that keeps getting brought up a lot is how things have to go through that amount of tests. Like if your iPhone dies on a plane, yeah, it's inconvenience, but it's not that big of a deal. But yeah, that I don't know, 30-year-old box there is it, it could blow up and probably still work. Um, but yeah, I never thought about it like that. The fact that the priorities might be quite different. Where when in a lot of what we hear in geospatial and EO is a lot about trying to reduce costs and being more efficient. But in aviation, the metric might be very different. It's like first it's getting zero planes down, and then we can start thinking about reducing the costs.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'd never actually thought about it like that, but that makes a lot of sense. I wonder if there's something similar for geospatial where it's not exactly just the cost,
Yeah.
but there's something else there.
Yeah, and I think the thing that also translates into geospatial, back to our geospatial is mainstream thing, is the process going from the technology and the innovation into operations, right? So you see, all these companies, it was like, we've got this space data, and people assume, oh, I'll just use it. It was like, no, no, no. That's why,
Yeah.
again, this gap is actually still big, and we need to work on it. It's that the gap is not solved, and you know, it's just not solved, and it's a challenge if you really want to use it for operational. And I hear this because we've been dealing in the case of agriculture, for example,
Mm-hmm.
them or agriculture and the insurance companies. So we have agriculture businesses, right? They're using AI and space data to determine crops and all of that, but their customers are the insurance companies that insure farmers and so on. And what they were telling me actually last week was, right now our insurance customers still double checks, what
Ah, right.
they still send either a drone to see if it's a big farm or somebody which is expensive either way, because we haven't yet gotten to the point where you can trust that if I said this is a cornfield, this is actually a cornfield because I saw it from space.
Right.
uh,
What
yeah.
do you think is in the way of that? Do you think it's just because it's too early? There's not enough um, validation that's done there? Because I feel like I've heard that a
Yeah.
few times. What do you
Yeah.
think is the cause of that?
Validation, definitely. Part of it is validation, part of it is maturity, where it's still new. So you can't
Right.
trust something new for something critical. And again, it's not quite breaking. I mean, they're not bleeding money.
Yeah,
The,
right.
the pain eventually goes back to, there's the potential for a lot more efficiencies, but they're not sitting and dying, right? And I think we have, again, the more we do this, the more the validation comes. What this example yesterday came up with the census. So here in the US, they have the census data, and they're using AI to deter for feature extractions, right? That eventually, right, it's like one thing to the next. So they do the feature extractions, they go into some data set that is then used for socioeconomic indicators, that is then used to determine who gets the money. And this has used to be a manual process. People would sit down and do it. So now they're starting to use AI, and they're getting questions. It's like, because this is real. Eventually, it's like there are some neighborhoods who will get money or no money, representation or no representation. So validation. So we need to, prove. And I think what everybody's doing is right now. So the agriculture person was telling me they used to double check every time. Now they just double check every now and then, or
Right.
just for the biggest claims. And you know, yeah.
Do you think we have a role as a kind of community and the people building those towards that? I think we've heard a lot of um, uh, bad stories, not necessarily in geospatial just yet, but in the whole field of data science about like things going wrong, predictions going terribly wrong, and arguably getting to that question of it's nearly life and death in some situations. Do you think we have an obligation to do that, and if so, how do we kind of do that in a way like making sure people can trust that, but also making it not blindly pushing for people to trust it, but making sure that we solve all those problems, especially when it's these socioeconomic problem that we're trying to solve.
So I think the answer is simple but not easy. First of all, we need to share. This is again what I'm trying to do with OGC and part of the new messaging right now. And we're getting better and better, right? Don't get me wrong. I'm not complaining at all, but we make our mistakes on our own in our own, places, and we're all making the same mistakes. So sharing would be the first thing, sharing this problem, right? And I think this is, again, you go back to the role of OGC. What happens is, we hear this. So we heard this from the insurance. We heard this yesterday from census. Now I'm talking to you. It's like, maybe there's something here. Can we talk about how do we deal with this issue again as a community to validate what you're doing? And then there are a lot of unknowns with the GeoAI. Even it's like, what is it, and what's the criteria, and how do you track it, and is it a black box, and what's the metadata? So you go back to the basics in a way, which now we're going back and having data quality workshops and metadata workshops, because it's different data. How do you describe the training data sets and what they're used for? I think this is when you say what we can do, there are all these things along the chain, right? So that the outcome is trusted and it's repeatable. So we're all trying to solve, I think, these problems,
Right.
in our businesses.
That's what I wanted to ask, if by sharing what we're doing, does that mean like creating a trust basically in the things that we're doing? But I guess I already have my
Mm.
answer. Um, one of the things there is I feel like sometimes it's not very accessible. Like you might put something, open source here, you can go take a look at the code, but the problem is, the people who actually have the skills to do that already know what the problem is. Do you think is that actually something that you guys are also working on trying to lower the barrier to entry at like understanding the problems and yeah, making it more accessible to be involved in that?
I think this is definitely, I think it's going back to the communication by getting the people. And when I mean the people, you have to get the experts and the users. So just an example, we did a disaster pilot, the first disaster pilot that we did now 2 years ago. The criticism on the demonstration was we had all the members who developed the technology actually come and do an end-to-end demonstration, and they were saying, no, I want the user. I want the user,
Okay.
because the user is not you, right? And so I think just making sure that the users are part of this conversation so that we can speak the same language, or at least translate their language, that's definitely you know, one part of the process.
Right.
Yeah.
And do you like one of the interesting things that happened? I saw you guys put out a questionnaire a few days ago, which was also quite fun, by the way. But one of the things that was really interesting about that was that uh, a lot of the emphasis was about how do you consume the things that we're putting out. Like, how do you learn? How do you use a documentation? How do you do that? So that's back on the developer side. And that was kind of one of the first times that I was reading something like that. And it's not just, all right, we're going to create this super duper tool and here's a bunch of text, spec sheets, and here you're going to go use it. It's going to be amazing. It was kind of even before that. It's like, how are you, learning? Do you read the documentation? Do you just go on YouTube? Do you listen to something? And I thought that was like, first of all, great to see that. And I hadn't really seen that before. And I was kind of wondering, how did that kind of come up, and what are you trying to get out of that? Also to, get closer to the people doing that.
Um, so it came up because we need to reach the developers. That's the only way we're going to get the actual requirements. That's the only way we can get the actual uptake, right? And this is understanding because, it's a whole new generation. How do they get that information? So those questions that you mentioned, so that when we can, again, we go back, we have limited resources, so we want to make sure that our resources are dedicated to giving people what they want. And in this case, if they're learning via these quick YouTube videos, let's make them, because or if they're, again, I think it's just trying to understand how, what they need so that we can provide it, which I think so far, just the results of the survey, I think, are going to be just eye-opening, I think, for us, right? It's
Right.
evolution, right?
That's what I was going to ask, if you had some of the early results already, and if you had seen, like, was that something surprising, or are we going to have to wait a little bit to see those results?
I have not, honestly, I have not seen the survey until you brought it up. So, Joanna, Joanna, she's our developer. So, she's the one behind, all this momentum behind the developers. But the only thing that I know for sure, that you were the only 25-year-old.
Yeah, so for the little story, there was like just this kind of edge case about asking for age. And so I'm 25, and there was no, like, it was only under or above 25, but no equal, which
No,
was, I
25.
think, very fun, because like all of what we do is about figuring out
Mm,
those edge cases. So yeah,
yeah.
that was quite fun for sure.
Yeah, I think I also heard, because of this, which I'm glad you brought it up, that we got more on the older side than the younger side. Which
Okay.
again, it's does this mean that there's more on the older side, or we have not reached that? Actually, we still have not reached the
Yeah.
target audience, and if so, how do we reach the target audience? And I think that's why you want us, trying to go to other API events, because just saying we have, OGC APIs, if they don't understand, we go back to the metaverse thing. If they don't understand that this is geospatial, you're never going to get to them.
Yeah, so what you're
Um,
saying is there's even a bias in the people that you're asking, like you want
mm,
to reach people outside, but
yeah,
to reach those people, you need to know where they are. And so it's kind of
yeah,
like this,
yeah.
Right. Yeah. If it's still up, I'll put it in the show notes, by the way, so people can take a look. I want to completely switch gears, and one of the things that also I've picked up on listening to some of the previous interviews that you talked about is that you mentioned that you really like languages, and so yeah, I really wanted to switch gears there and kind of wanted to ask what you found interesting in languages. So talking about spoken
Mm.
languages like English.
Uh, so I don't know if I really like languages. I just, again, it's like things happen. You know, you grew up in
Right.
Lebanon, your first language is Arabic, which is not an easy language, which helps. When your first language is,
Yeah.
one of the toughest, you're good to go. And then it's a francophone country, so schools are in French. And then the English happened. So at the time, Beirut was literally split into half, like East and West.
Okay.
And we didn't study English in school, but the French university was on the other side of where we lived. And actually, to cross, you literally had to cross, in sand and whatever. And it's not safe, right? It's really not safe. And the American university was on our side. And so it's like, all right, English it is. So,
Okay.
and I tell them, oh my God, I learned English from just TV subtitles, and then songs, listening to songs, George Michael and Madonna and whatever. And I say, thank God that, I didn't grow up, if I grew up now and I'm listening to today's music, I would be like all Pitbull and whatever, and it would be a horrible English. And the good thing about engineering, right, is you
Yeah,
don't
that's
need
true.
the language. It's equations, and you can get by really, really nicely for a long time. And
Yeah,
then English is not a tough language, right?
right. Yeah. Well, yeah, I guess compared to, I haven't learned Arabic at all, but I've heard from it that, yeah, it probably is quite tricky. So do you
I did,
still,
yeah, sorry.
no, I just wanted to say, do you still speak actually all three languages? On peut parler un peu en français?
Oui, oui, bien sûr, j'essaie.
Yeah, without
Yeah,
going necessarily to the French, I'm quite curious because
uh,
I find, people's relationship to language really interesting as
uh,
well. Um,
I it definitely makes it easier. Maybe this is, again, I don't know which causes what, but this is my attraction to OGC because it's global and you meet all sorts of people and
right,
all sorts of languages and cultures, or it's the opposite, right? So I don't know who attracts what, right? Um, I think I mentioned earlier, like American Sign Language is a totally also different way
right,
of expressing yourself. And uh, again, it's like it's so different, but it's also enables you to connect with people you wouldn't normally connect with. It's like a whole new community, and it helps me also worldwide. I know it's not American, but there's a lot of sign in
yeah,
the sign language that you can actually communicate with just your hands and your face and your just expression overall. um, which is yeah, fun. I did uh, Don't Hold Me. So my I had a little stint with German, just a little bit, because my ex-husband was Austrian,
okay,
and I did have to do like the citizenship exam. So I got the Austrian citizenship from him, and so I had to learn German because it
right.
had to do so that was my only, so I remember a few things. And again, they get you by sometimes, and sometimes that's all you need. You connect, and then
Right.
the rest flows, right?
Do you think with the world being very English centric, we're also leaving a lot of people on the table? A little bit outside of that don't necessarily have that access to English.
That's a good question. So I was up at 2 a.m. today, listening to the university working group at OGC. So they're meeting, and we had all these um, students essentially presenting their work, and it made me think because we had like Chinese and Taiwanese and
Mm,
and European and Australian. Australian, they speak English anyways, but I was actually impressed that their English is actually and the way they articulate, it's way better than when we did it, right?
Right.
Like even 15 years ago, which I think tells me that they're maybe for science and engineering, universities and schools are using English more, or maybe we're training people to be more global,
Right.
so we're helping them with English. I don't know. I know in Lebanon, for example, right now, it's a very bizarre mix of English, French, and Arabic in like the same
Okay.
sentence. You go tuk 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 tuk, and I hear that it's like that in many places, in the world.
Right. I think this is a very nice place to end it. Once again, I want to ask this question because I like it. Is there anything, any media, any podcast, any books that you have listened to or read recently that have impacted you and that you think might be worth sharing?
Uh, I definitely books. Actually, more than this, I talk to people like,
Right.
and that these guys should have podcasts. But literally, so this arrived yesterday, so I'm showing two books. One of them is gap selling. So I love to read business books. So
Okay.
I'll have like, what is it? A traction book. I think I'm learning a lot. I know the audience can't see this, but I'm showing it to you anyways. Culture renovation, because I
Okay.
feel that a lot of what we're going through is renovation, transformation. And then somebody recommended this book, the the Lego book, about again innovating what you're doing and how
What's
you're
the
doing it.
title of this one?
It's called Brick by Brick.
Okay.
Um, I'm reading in my bedroom, so I have a book everywhere, maybe. So it's a little bit of everything. But in my bedroom, I have the what is it? Being Human in the Age of Data.
Okay.
So we have a lot of data, whatever. So I like these things. I think podcasts. I listen to you guys. So in our community, I definitely listen to you, to Daniel, to Arvind recently. But I also listen to some of the business
Right.
podcasts, which the weird thing about them is when you listen and even when you read the books, it's like, of course it makes sense. A 5-year plan and I have 5 steps. It's like, have you dealt with people before?
Yeah.
But again, you don't feel lonely, right? You don't feel like, it gives you some confidence, I think, in the decisions. I don't know if I've answered your question, but
No, this is great. This is, it's a very open question, so I'm expecting very open answers as well. So, yeah, thank you very much for your time, for being really open and yeah, spending all that time with me and being available. I really appreciate it.
thank you for having me. Thank you for being you. I see great things in your future, and you guys are the future. So I hope this continues in terms of just connecting, right? I think that's what you're doing in this podcast, and I hope we connect also. I really hope in person very
Yeah,
soon.
I
Yeah.
hopefully, we look back in a few years at this and be like, yeah, this pandemic was just a pause in meeting people in real life. So I definitely look forward to it. I hope to go back to the US
Yes.
someday soon.
Yep.
So thank you very much.
Thank you.